Great. So, good evening to everyone and a very warm welcome to all my colleagues and Kunal. As a part of Aavishkaar Group's Leadership Talk series, I'm very excited to host Kunal Bahl today. To give you a short introduction of this prolific leader, Kunal is a technology entrepreneur and an investor. He's a co-founder of Aavishkaar Group, which is the holding company of Snapdeal, Unicommerce and Stellaro Brands. He's been an active participant in the Indian startup ecosystem and is a technology investor. He's invested in more than 250 startups across various verticals through Titan Capital. And he has backed some of the large names that we know today and associate with, like Ola, Urban Company, Razorpay, Shadowfax, Bira, Mamaearth, and the list goes on. Kunal is also an influential voice on issues pertaining to the Indian startup and entrepreneurship. He's a member of the Executive Council at NASSCOM, a member of the National Startup Advisory Council, and an elected member of the Board of Governors of the Indian Council of Research on International Economic Relations. Kunal is also ex-chair of CII E-Commerce Committee. He's also an independent director on the board of Piramal Enterprises Limited. He's graduated from Jerome Fisher Program in Management and Technology from the University of Pennsylvania and holds degrees in engineering and business from the Wharton School. All of this we, of course, already know if we have read up anything about Kunal. And a very warm welcome to you, Kunal. Thanks for kicking off our Leadership Talk series. There's a lot of excitement to understand your perspectives on entrepreneurship, leadership, and investing. I think before we start, a few pointers for the audience. There will be a Q&A session towards the end where people can raise their hand or type their questions in the chat box. Depending on the time availability, we will try to accommodate as many questions as possible. Let me turn to you, Kunal, now and start by asking you this. You have been an entrepreneur now for nearly 15 years, much before entrepreneurship actually became a cool thing. How did you choose to become one?
Firstly, thanks for having me, Disha, and it's a pleasure being here. I've known Vineet for probably like 12 years now. I remember one of my earliest investments was in a company called AgroStar, which Vineet and us invested in. And I've known him since and met him a few times since. So it's always a pleasure speaking with fellow colleagues from the industry. So actually, my induction into entrepreneurship was very accidental. And if there's one thing I truly believe in life is about the role of serendipity, because my life is just, everything looks, when you read off from a piece of paper, it looks all sorted and, this guy must be, had it all figured out at the age of 9. And I can assure you it was anything but that. Still haven't figured out most things in life, I would say, but a lot of serendipity, a lot of luck has played a lot of role in at least my life, and both for good and bad, right? Not just good. Everyone talks about the good stuff only, but it was quite accidental in some ways and unwanted also, that how my entrepreneurial journey began. I was working at Microsoft in the US, 1 year out of college, a few months out of college actually, and Microsoft applied for my visa, and which got rejected, my H-1B visa, and that I was left with no option. They pretty much asked me to leave the country. But, deep down within, I always had the desire to start something of my own from a relatively young age. I wouldn't say since I was 5, but like from probably since the time I was a teenager, I had a lot of interest in reading about business people, reading about businesses. There was, I had access to internet when I was in 10th grade. So, probably from the time one starts getting access to unlimited information, that's when a lot of curiosities also get sparked. So I always knew I would do something entrepreneurial, but I didn't know when, how, etc. And this was sort of God's way of precipitating this journey of entrepreneurship. So I returned to India and I had the option of working for Microsoft in India or, go do a job anywhere else. And that was a very viable option. And I'm sure for my parents, a preferred option that I would have taken, because then getting me married would have been infinitely easier for them. Compared to me, saying, okay, I'll do some, coupon book business. We were not doing anything to do with the internet at that point in time. But I think the other serendipitous role, which led me to becoming an entrepreneur, was the fact that I'd met my closest friend, Rohit, when I was in school. And we used to sit next to each other in 11th and 12th grade. And he, when I knew I was going to come back to India when my visa was rejected, the first thing I did was actually called him and said, look, I'm coming back. What's your plan? And he was working at Capital One. He was like, I'm here, but it's not fun. And so we just decided, we had absolute amount of trust in and respect for each other's abilities, and just as friends, had tremendous chemistry, etc. So we just decided to embark on it. I think so many things had to come together, accidental and maybe planned, for this journey to start. So it wasn't part of a grand plan, that I can assure you.
No, and it is quite interesting to know that, from back then, where probably entrepreneurship itself and entrepreneurship in India, right? Because we've associated entrepreneurship through the generations ahead of us, and we've seen the challenges, and, different people have different association to what it means. And did sort of having exposure to the Western sort of way of working influence you to start something over here, which was slightly more new age and do things in a different way?
Possibly. It's hard to say what I would have been had I not been that, but not gone there. But, I was the first person in my extended family to ever set foot on US soil, let alone to study. So it was, I'd never met, spoken with, or shaken hands with a non-Indian person in my life. It was the first time that happened was on my first day of college. So it was quite a, shock for me, but I think that environment did help me open up, blossom, be open to lots of new ideas, culture, perspectives, opinions, etc. So I think it definitely did help. But when we started, there was nothing known as a startup, which is now part of the national parlance, thanks to the current government and the Prime Minister, who keep talking it up in a way that encourages the youth of India to embark in this direction, and they have been since the last 8 years. But there was nothing known as a startup. You either did a job or you did what is called a business, right? What is the startup thing? What does it even mean? It sounds like a verb, but they make it seem like a noun. And actually, there was no ecosystem as such. There's no mentor network. There was no fellow founder network. There was none of the goodness that we see. There were like all of 12 VCs in all of India. So nothing close to what we see now. There were, I think, in 2007, when we started, there were between 5 and 10 million internet users compared to 1 billion internet users now. So we've seen the entire arc of India going from less than 10 million internet users to 1 billion internet users in the last 15 years. And obviously exposure helps, but so does courage. At some level, a lot of people right now, everyone has infinite exposure, but to give up something, especially if you have high opportunity costs, if you come from a good college or good professional pedigree, there's a lot of opportunity costs associated with it. So you require some degree of irrationality and some degree of courage to get going.
No, and that's exactly what I wanted to get into as well. Back then, as you said, the ecosystem did not exist, and entrepreneurship, as we all here in the audience would also agree, is a hard journey. Right? There are lots of ups and downs, and you need to see it through no matter what to be a true entrepreneur. You, of course, have been there, done that. You've created one of the most recognized names, Snapdeal, in the most competitive sectors, I would also say. And you've seen the adulation, you've seen the brickbats as well. Alongside, you've built India's largest early stage technology investment vehicle, Titan Capital, right? Where you've invested in more than 250 startups. I mean, for most of the people, one of these things is once in a lifetime. You've been able to sort of, do it all. So how did you go about building, renewing, and adding so much in your journey as an entrepreneur and as an investor later?
Yeah, as I said, it all looks nicer when it all sounds nicer when you say it, but the the sausage making journey is a lot messier. I think the end result sometimes can be packaged in a way that it looks nicer than or cleaner than the journey actually is. But that's sort of the fun of it also. But look, I've always been a big optimist about India in general, right? In the we were younger, we didn't have this much sense about about macro and India and all that. But I think over the years, I've just been a very big bull on India and India's future. People often ask me, what will change in the next 10 years? You've seen so much change in the last 15 years in our country because of technology, because of internet, geo, payments, etc. Now, what will change next 10 years? And I say, what will not change? Everything will change, right? There's nothing that will not change. So you question every assumption, everything that you think you take for a given. There is a very strong chance it will change in the next 10 to 15 year time frame. In some cases, 1 year and 5 year time frame, which we've seen owed to COVID. Many of us don't realize that India was a top 2 economy for 1700 years. From AD 1 to AD 1700, we were a top 2 economy of the world. When the British came to India in 1850, we accounted for 27% of global GDP. And within 50 years, we accounted for 3% of global GDP. So we are inherently destined to create wealth and create businesses and create a large economy, because as a society we were able to sustain that competitive advantage for 1700 years, which is unreal, which is unbelievable. And so finally, after 300 and something years, right, 320 odd years, India is finally on track to be the third largest economy again in 2030, right? So I just look at it as what a time to be alive in India. Had we been alive 50 years ago or 100 years ago, we would have been alive in a very different country. But obviously, our future generations would be even more benefited, assuming we all do our bit in the coming few years. So it is just a tremendous time to be alive in India, to be building in India, to be building for India, and building from India also. And we are entering a phase where things are compounding so fast. We're one of the few countries where we'll be adding $400 to $500 billion of I was going to say GDP every year, and there are really no other countries which are going to be able to do that. So the fact that we are all professionally entrenched, doing all the great things we are all respectively doing in a country where we're going to add $400 to $500 billion of new GDP every year for the next many years, and more than doubling our GDP next 6-7 years, it's very easy to excite yourself. It's not like we are in some sluggish, dead economy. We are in the world's most exciting economy. I get giddy with excitement about all the things one can do, all the things one can support, all the founders, the great folks who are building for India's future across all sectors. And now we have all the building blocks in place, right? We have the best digitization arguably in the world. We have fairly supportive policy and a forward-looking government that's thinking ahead now that, hey, in India, with a population of 1.5 billion people, there are largely only 2 or 3 sectors that can employ hundreds of millions of people, right? Agriculture, retail, manufacturing. And those are the sectors that are getting a lot of the push, particularly agriculture and manufacturing. So, and then finally, I think we have arguably among the best talent in the world, right? We have huge hordes of incredibly high quality talent in our country. We have so many things going for us right now as a country. Most nations would die to have one of these things going for them. And So what is there to be not excited about? It's very easy to renew one's energy. It's very easy to be thrilled about building in India and supporting others who are actually building in India.
Sure. And, that's the excitement with which investors like us also sort of coexist to sort of ride on that opportunity wave. But, as you said, right, it's not been as charted out and well thought out. It's been messy, and so is the case, right, with any entrepreneur that we would go through. And there is always this period of highs and lows, sometimes highs and lows during the day itself, and sometimes over that stretch over a period of time. And what has been your sort of strategy or mantra to be able to deal with those high pressure environments and situations?
Yeah. Well, the best way to not fail, I can tell you, is to not try anything worthy. So that's the best way. But if you're going to try anything worthy in life, you're going to fail from time to time. It's going to happen. And, as I said, I feel really blessed and lucky for the life I've had till now. But in hindsight, like when you were speaking about, he's done this, he's done that, which is very generous of you. But the only thing I was remembering when you were speaking about those was all the times that things didn't go as per plan, when I failed, or when when there was no success to be found for a long periods of time. Actually, most people recount more of those rather than when things go well, and that's what keeps you humble. And the greatest glory is not in not falling; it's in getting up every time you fall. And because if you have that courage and that ability to get up every time you fall, you'll do fine in the long run. And also the longer we dwell on our misfortunes, the greater is their power to harm us. So if we keep thinking about, oh, that didn't work, oh, that didn't go as per plan, that should have gone better, I did everything, that guy didn't do his job, then we are only getting harmed in the process. And look, everyone will go through their troughs, right? Periods where nothing is going right, everything is going wrong. You feel you did everything right, but yet you're not getting the results and you're absolutely at the bottom of the abyss. It is at that moment that most people give up. I would say 90% people give up then. But it is at that very moment where you need to gather that just little bit of courage, that little bit of grit to keep continuing. And you realize very quickly you come out of the trough. But the worst thing is to give up at the lowest moment, because after that things are only going to get better. And many times, people remember the tough periods in their lives, but they often don't remember that it's those storms that sometimes also clear out their lives a little bit. Clear out people from your lives sometimes, clear out situations from your lives sometimes, makes it clear in your head what you need to do and what you shouldn't do. And often on the other side of that storm, you find the strength that comes from having dealt with the storm also. So every entrepreneur has gone through so much, whether they talk about it or not. But I have so much respect for every founder, irrespective of the scale of their business or how much time they've been building for. Only an entrepreneur knows the anxieties in his business and all the stresses that they deal with. But I think one should just keep one's chin up and just not give up. Like just tell oneself, I will not give up, come what may. And you realize that you end up in a good place eventually.
And when you were talking about your own journey, and I could sort of, from an external perspective, try and correlate it to sort of what you could have possibly gone through. I think one of the important experiences that you've also had is that you worked with a lot of stakeholders with you, right? Whether it's team members, whether it is shareholders, sort of even sometimes regulatory sort of stakeholders. And there could be points in time where I'm sure, there would have been differing points of view. And since you are in the pole position when it comes to leading your own venture, how do you sort of go about aligning everybody's interests or aligning all the stakeholders? It becomes crucial as well. how have you sort of managed those kind of situations?
Yeah, I feel that's a very good question, Disha. I actually feel that in the end, it all boils down to clear and real-time communication. Oftentimes, things break down when people are not communicating. Or the converse of that would be there used to be this Airtel ad when I was younger. Maybe this is like 15, 20 years ago. And there's this two boys playing football on other side, each sides of a border, which arguably were India and Pakistan, although it was not mentioned that. And the ad ended with a tagline where they start playing and they start laughing and all that. It says barriers break when people talk, right? So, and I think that was probably the best tagline that a mobile phone company could ever come up with. But I think it applies very much to our lives in general, whether it's our personal or our professional lives. Oftentimes barriers break when people talk, but a lot of barriers get created when people don't talk as well. And people start making assumptions about the other person's motivations, other person's objectives, potential ulterior objectives, etc. Whether it's with team members, whether it's with your leadership team, the broader employee base, shareholders, customers, if it's a B2B type business, just constant communication, whether it's good news, bad news, constant cadence of communication is probably the number one way of managing stakeholders of every kind. It sounds like a very simple thing, but given it requires a tremendous amount of physical and emotional effort on an ongoing basis, most people are not able to do it. And sometimes the solution is easy, but people just don't execute on the solution. So we've always had a strong cadence, whether times are good or bad, having monthly town halls, talking to the team members, having open door policy where anyone can truly open door policies, creating lots of forums or small group discussions, rewards and recognitions, one-on-ones at regular cadences. So there's utmost the communication of the same message is going from multiple directions to people, and people need to hear it at least 10 times for it to truly go in. The same applies to your board, same applies, like constantly keeping them updated, taking them along with you versus showing up with a nicely wrapped up box and then having to deal with a not invented here syndrome. So just constant, clear, transparent, honest, real-time communication. There is absolutely no alternative to that. And honestly, you don't need to do much else than that. People will make peace with performance issues because of market externalities, because of team issue, whatever it may be, regulatory matters. I think most seasoned people in business are fairly sensible about these things, that not everything will go as per plan. But whether you're seasoned or unseasoned, most people are pretty bad at dealing with is negative surprises. So the founder's responsibility to avoid, they may not be able to avoid negative outcomes in a business, but they can surely avoid negative surprises by communicating better.
Very, very interesting. Now, turning towards your sort of more recent investing role, right? You probably started as an angel investor much before, again, this term became very popular, right? And you have invested in more than 250 companies now. I think it would be interesting to learn how did the switch happen, right? From being an entrepreneur to then slowly start investing and then being a passionate investor in your own right.
Yeah. Look, in my heart, I'm still an entrepreneur only. So I don't really think of myself as a career investor in some ways. I feel I lead a multifaceted life. I do things I enjoy, and as long as I feel I can do a good job and create impact, I'll keep doing them. The motivation we had to support founders was just to help them in their journeys. Because when we started, like you rightly said, Disha, there was no mentor or angel investor ecosystem. And I remember someone introduced us to some real estate person in Delhi when we were starting, saying that this person wants to support young founders. We were all of 23 when we started, and we showed up, we pitched to the person for 1.5 to 2 hours. was very intently listening to everything we were talking about, this grand plan of launching coupon book business. And Rohit and I thought that this person will surely invest. At the end of the meeting, he says, guys, I really love you. I think you're fantastic. I think this is a fantastic business. I'll give you 50 lakhs for 65% of the company. And so I think the the concept of angel and devil investor were quite intertwined at that time. So one could not call such folks as angel investors really. And look, over the last 15 years, we've gone through every possible cycle for the most part, maybe not every possible, and many possible cycles of hiring people, of raising capital, of getting onboarding customers, building B2B businesses, B2C businesses, logistics, supply chain, marketing, finance, every possible thing a founder has to do in his or her journey from day zero to day thousands. We would have done most of those a few times over, both well and as well as poorly, and learn from it, hopefully. We don't want the founders to make the same mistakes again, because they shouldn't. It's expensive in terms of time and money to make those mistakes. Now, look, our way of paying it forward is to strengthen and grow the ecosystem that's given us everything we have today. Like when I showed up with nothing, 1 year of savings from our respective jobs at Microsoft and Capital One, we had absolutely nothing. We had 30 lakhs between the two of us with which we started. And many times we ran out of money through the journey, but we figured out a way every time. And look, over a 15-year period, I feel the trajectory has been in the right direction overall. So we feel very thankful to the ecosystem. It's changed our lives, changed our families' lives, and allowed us to create so much impact. This is our time to now give back. And while you mentioned that it's recent, we've been investing in these startups for the last 12 years. So I think we've been an investor for longer than many investors in the ecosystem. In Gita, there is a saying that what you take owns you and what you give sets you free. So at some level, when taking money owns you and giving money actually sets you free in some ways, and it gives you great vicarious joy as you see companies and founders who come to you with just a concept, a PowerPoint, and 2 or 3 guys and girls, and then a few years later they're touching lives of millions of people every day. They become a household name sometimes, or a global name also sometimes. No, there is no greater happiness than that. Maybe my only other greater happiness is my children, but there's no greater happiness than seeing absolutely nothing. Like there's just literally not even an atom at that point in time become this really blossoming business with great impact.
And I think that's a good segue into the next question also that I had, right? You're coming in at a stage where you rightly said there isn't much, right, to be seen or validated on. It's sometimes just a sheer idea, passion, etc. And 12 years, 280 investments, so many unicorns, so many on the path of unicorn. Is there any particular framework that you have sort of that has evolved through this time, basis which you sort of try and evaluate the businesses before you take a bet on them?
Yeah, look, at the earlier stages of the business, the assessment can only be basis very limited factors, because as you know, there's really not much data. There isn't really any one metric we index on, because there just isn't substantive data. But businesses that tend to lack focus on a singular and sharply defined problem statement, we tend to have a problem with. So that to us is a clear, elimination. If the company doesn't have a singular focus, and that's an easy decision. But founders are smart now. They understand the value of focus, especially in the early days and also later on. So we don't have that issue as much anymore that we used to. We're also sector agnostic. So we look at everything at face value. We have a sort of saying internally at Titan that we walk into a room with a founder with 0 biases. If that space is not in favor today, it doesn't matter to us. We're not looking to invest in the hot thing today, or the hot space today, or the dead space, or avoid the dead space today. Every business is assessed on its merit. Every founder is assessed on his or her merit as well. Now, that said, there are three things that we will largely focus on. One is the team, which is obviously very, very crucial, where, have they achieved any degree of academic or professional success in their lives, where they've shown that they can outperform those around them? Do they have that competitive streak to them, and that streak of excellence in what they do? And look, the best founders have a way of mesmerizing people, right? So they know that the ability to inspire those around them. Can I visualize at some point them standing in front of 500 or 1,000 employees in their company and truly showing them the way? So team is very critical in terms of their understanding of what they are building, their detail orientation, but their ability to also inspire those around them. The second is obviously the attractiveness of the space itself, right? We don't want to go after very niche spaces. The business may start with a niche problem statement in a large market that we like, but we don't want a niche business in a niche market, because that means that even if the founder and founders do everything right, it may not become a very large business, and that's okay. But then we don't need to be involved, right? We want to be involved if we feel and the founder feels and has the ambition to build something truly, truly large and very, very impactful. And the final thing would be the ability to generate unit economics, right? So through our own journey, as you said, in a very competitive market, we've had our own, trial by fire of learning the value of unit economics, and why setting the path of economics in a business, particularly unit economics of a business, right, on day zero is so critical, because it's important for a founder to know, and for us to know, what they're building. Is it a squirrel with a tail or elephant with a trunk, right? Because you can't change that later on. Oftentimes founders would tell us that, hey, it's a 10% margin business, but as scale grows, in 3-4 years, it'll become a 40% margin business. And I tell them, look, I believe you that it will become a 40% margin business, but I can also assure you it will be a different business. So you can't be in the same business and change margins so dramatically without changing the core business you are in. And hence setting that framework right from day one helps in how you build the product, how you go to market, how you budget, how much money you will ever have to spend on fixed recurring costs. So a lot of choices get defined by what is the shape of the P&L of the business going to look like. So, and given our own experience with, very sort of dhanda type businesses, this is something that we are able to instill in the companies very early on. So I would say those are the three things: quality of team, size of opportunity, and the unit economics.
Great. And I think, toggling between growth and profitability has always been dynamic and a complex decision, right, for entrepreneurs. I think as Aavishkaar Capital, we've always believed in sustainable growth, right? And we've often come across situations where entrepreneurs have been driven towards growth at all costs. There was a phase in which, this became like the prime driver, and that narrative has changed over the recent times, right? What is your sort of take or view on this issue of growth versus profitability, and how do you balance it out?
Yeah, I think one of the, while all the things you said, Disha, are correct, but it's not like founders. I think there's a wrong notion that founders don't want to build profitable companies in the ecosystem. I think founders, they're very sensible, most of them. And profitability has always been the guiding metric, because it is part of the conversation. Whether the company is making progress or against it or not is a separate topic, but it is part of the conversation. It's just that people weren't sure how long it will take and how much money it will take to get there. And so the can just kept on getting kicked down the street, especially as money was flowing in thick and fast. Now, it is very important for companies and founders to know that how they will make money, right? Many times one would meet founders where it is just not clear that given the margin structures they're operating on, at any scale, if they would ever make money, right? And there is some amount of delusion sometimes around what will happen as a result of which they'll be able to make money. And I think getting those unit economics right early on, and the trajectory of unit economics right early on, hence become very important, so that with every day that you're building, you're inching closer to it and not farther away from it, or just going in a completely different direction. Now, that said, it's very easy to say, very hard to execute, especially when we are all competing in competitive markets where a competitor raises capital and then you're wondering, what should I do? Why am I the only profitable one? And these are tricky and situation specific calls that companies and founders have to take. However, the ability to change gears when the environment changes is very crucial. And when the environment changes, businesses must know first how to survive, and survive at any cost. Oftentimes people feel, sometimes I've seen companies say, hey, I'll just race to the edge of the cliff, maybe I'll sprout some wings and I'll fly, right? And nothing will happen to me. But I've rarely seen that work. More often than not, one falls. And like, for instance, I would tell founders that, look, there's no shame in cutting down your scale. Don't worry about growth. It's okay to degrow also. But first, be in control of your own destiny. Don't let other people, don't depend on this constant dependence on kindness of strangers is not going to take us anywhere. At the end of the day, of kindness of strangers to give us capital. So let us just take our destiny in our own hands. And if it requires cutting down scale by half, 40%, 30%, it's okay if it gets us closer to being in control of our destiny. And otherwise, more growth at bad unit economics is usually just leads companies to dig deeper holes for themselves. Now, obviously, this is very generic gyan, but every situation has its own nuances. As I said, basis market situation, size of company, amount of money in the bank, etc. So you have to calibrate the answer depending on the situation. But broadly, at least, our thought has always been that, look, every day we may not be profitable today, but every day we are in business, we should be inching towards that, not going away from it. And we are no longer in the era that we were building our business in, where the market was, even up till like pre-Geo, we used to debate whether we have 75 million internet users or 100 million internet users, right? So it was really after Geo, the market exploded. So prior to that, the amount of money that needed to be invested to just educate the market about, let's say in our case, e-commerce, etc., and the investments we had to make in logistics and payment and technology, because nothing was available off the shelf like it does today. And so it was a different era. Had we not made those investments, none of the infra that many subsequent companies were able to ride on would have gotten created, or the behavior change that we precipitated would not have benefited the ecosystem thereafter. So every moment in time for a company and a market, you have to make very deliberate decisions around what needs to be done. But one can't have this, andhadhund, just keep spending money and hope one day profitability will descend upon oneself.
And that's true. One of the internal debates that we've been having for quite some time. And you did touch upon the point that, as an ecosystem, a lot of things have come together, both for an entrepreneur and as an investor at an early stage as well. I'm sure you would have also seen how the building blocks of the investing ecosystem potentially have also evolved. As things stand today, right, what would you feel that needs to be worked upon more, either from the lens of an entrepreneur or as an early stage investor? Yeah. Where are some of the gaps that need to be plugged?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I've also been thinking about it, because I think because now when the money is dry, everyone's having to think under constraints, and a lot of the skeletons start coming out of the closet during these times within companies also. I think one of the discipline that at least I've seen lacking and much needed in the ecosystem is around rigor around financial reporting, where especially in the technology space, there is usually a lot of, let's just keep kicking the can down the street. Right now, we're just trying to get to PMF, we are trying to get our first 10 customers, we're trying to do this. There's a lot of explanations for why financial reporting is not important, that our revenue is so small, why does it matter, etc. We have incredible amount of discipline that we guide the companies we invest in, where we say, look, even if you only have expense in the business for the next 1 year, it's no problem, but it needs to be reported every month diligently by the same date of that month. So I think just the quality, reliability, and regularity of financial reporting in the ecosystem really needs to get upgraded. And I think all investors, founders, everyone has a collective role to play in it. And this, I'm not talking about audits, etc. I'm not going in that direction. I'm saying this just from assuming everyone's working ethically, everyone's working with the right intentions. But sometimes, good intentions are not all that you need. You also, for everything else, you need, it may be fine, good intentions, but what you can't have is a derailment of the business because you just don't know what's going on, whether on revenues, whether on margins, whether on the cost structure of the business. So if there's one thing, if I had a magic wand I could wave, is every company that we are involved in at least sends their monthly MIS on time, accurately, and doesn't miss it ever.
Yes, I think that is the key ask that most of the investors end these days. I'm glad you touched upon that. I think last couple of questions before we dive into the Q&A. And you did touch upon this aspect earlier as well, which is the opportunities that you see in the overall Indian ecosystem, or the opportunity at an overall macro level. But if you were to sort of name a few areas in which you see the possibility of growth higher than the others, what would those be?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are not, I just want to be clear. I don't think thematically that, this theme is big, so let's find companies in this space. I feel that's usually for an early stage investor, that's a trap, because you start drinking your own intellectual Kool-Aid and you'll start investing, everything will start looking like a nail to you. Every company in that subsector that you have thematically identified will start seeming like a nail. This is also great, that's also great, let's do everything, right? You become gluttonous almost. So it's sometimes good to not have a theme. It's good to have principles and philosophies around investing, like what I mentioned, which are very basic. But sometimes themes can be counterproductive. That said, I can look in the rear view mirror and say, here are the things that we think are interesting basis the kind of companies we've invested in recent past. And maybe the answer is the same. Like, we think that India is going to go through a big manufacturing revolution. By the way, none of the things I'm going to say are going to blow your minds off, but we don't think we are particularly insightful people when it comes to trends and themes. Our skill lies in deciding whether to invest in a particular company or not. So, but I think the manufacturing is really an enduring theme in India. We're going to go from 15% to 21% of GDP being manufacturing in the next 6-7 years, of a doubling base of GDP. So there is no doubt in my mind that we're going to create massive businesses, opportunities for all kinds of allied technology businesses also for manufacturing. Like, we've invested in companies that make steel furnaces more efficient using computer vision, right? Like, or we've invested in ceramic raw material providers, efficient raw material providers to ceramic manufacturers, ceramic tiles manufacturers, businesses that are replacing buying houses for fashion. So there are all kinds of businesses in B2B manufacturing that we have found interesting historically and invested in. Second area I would say is that what I call I think in the last few years, we had a lot of businesses that were trying to create cute regulatory arbitrages in fintech. And I think there has been a reckoning there, which maybe was bound to happen because we have a very, very competent and strong regulator. and it was bound to happen that arbitrages of any kind, whether a fintech or non-fintech, will get clogged. I think we have great practice as a nation to find arbitrages, but also then close them through the regulators. So, but I feel that there is an era of what I call the boring fintechs, where these are companies who are being built in line with where the regulatory regime is going, where the nation's blueprint is going, versus where finding these like little pockets, air pockets of regulatory grayness. I think those businesses can't be enduring. Third, I would say is SaaS, which is now pretty well known, where we've been doing $100 billion plus of IT exports every year, services. I feel all that will start getting productized, and it's ours to take for the world. And finally, I feel we have now most populous nation in the world. Our population will peak in 2040, after which we'll start degrowing in terms of population and have a fate like Japan and others. It's going to be a pretty tough period for us as a country, given the current healthcare infrastructure. So we just don't have enough healthcare facilities to reactively address the healthcare needs of 1.5 billion population. And we definitely don't have healthcare infrastructure anytime in the near future to address a degrowing, which means a materially aging population, like the boomers of India, boomers at scale of hundreds of millions. So I think a lot of technology can play a very big role there in preventive healthcare. But there isn't a lot of interesting companies we've seen in that space, but I'm pretty sure the best founders are thinking about it.
Oh, great. And I think while the audience puts in their questions, one last topic, I think what would you say would be your single greatest learning from your own journey?
Yeah, we could do a session on that, but single is, I think, these questions about one learning, one mistake, those are very hard, because I wish our lives were so simple and can be synthesized so simply. But maybe a couple of things. One is there's tremendous joy. Everyone says it, help karo logon ki. When we are growing up also, you should help people in need, etc. And you never appreciate it enough, the joy of doing that, till you start actually helping people. So I think there is truly, and I'm not saying it just for the sake of it, because for the longest time, even I didn't get it. But there is truly great joy in helping other people succeed and do better than even they think they can in their lives. The second is, just never giving into this fear of failure, because that's a very malignant feeling to carry. That just never feeling that you can fail is very important. Doesn't mean you're not humble, but not also always feeling this constant fear that what if it doesn't work, because what if it works. And thirdly, I would say is just focus, right? Something I alluded to earlier also. I think our ecosystem of founders has matured a lot over the last 2-3 years. And we are seeing less of those conversations we are having to have, where you can only be world class if you have excellence in doing something, and you can only have excellence in doing something if you are focused. And sometimes these young, bright-eyed founders, they feel they can do 3 things at the same time because somewhere they are related, but oftentimes as time progresses, you realize they're 3 different businesses. And hence, this focusing on one large, exciting problem to solve is usually enough to build a very large company if you execute well on it. I think finally, more sort of, I always tell when I meet with young folks, I know here the group is more seasoned and eclectic, but when I meet younger founders or students, etc., I always tell them one of the best decisions I took. I don't think I took it as a decision, but I think it was just my personality, where you're never letting your personal lifestyle get ahead of your financial success. So, nothing in my personal lifestyle changed over the last 10 years. Maybe took 1 extra vacation a year or something, but nothing else changed. Why that helps is because we talked a lot about the twists and turns in life, but when twists and turns come, you have enough buffer built up to absorb any kind of shocks in your professional life, and at least your family doesn't feel the professional shocks. So just never letting lifestyle get ahead of your success and means is very, very critical.
Great. I think we can give you a 30-second break while we collate all the questions. It's been a lot of talking at your end. Audience, you can send the questions either through chat or through the Q&A box that you see at the bottom of the panel. I think we've got the initial few questions. Okay, so okay, I think quite a few questions getting lined up now. Couple of questions that have started coming in, Kunal. The first one is that in case of investing in a startup, what are the critical qualitative and quantitative areas one should see as a part of principle, and not it necessarily being thematic, but what are the core principles that you look for apart from the framework that you mentioned? I think more related to the founders themselves.
Yeah, I think a lot of it I mentioned already, but I would say I like spending time, not to waste founders' time, but I like meeting them 2-3 times. Because we are investing our capital, right? We don't have any external capital, and we can stay invested for 10, 15, 20 years. Some of the companies we are investors in for a decade or more already. So we usually will outlast most of the funds. And so we are the first guy in, and then we are maybe the last guy out also. So hence it's actually a marriage, right? It's at least a 10-year marriage, if not longer. So one has to be very, very sure what you're getting into on both sides, right? They also need to know us and know how we work, how we don't, what we like, what we don't like. But just authenticity is very important. And where you feel that whatever the founder is saying, whatever the founder is believing, it is authentic, versus they're just trying to do a sales job. And there is always going to be some part of it where it's a sales job. They want money, we have money to give, they have money to take, they want money, right? So we understand there's an element of that, and we are able to recognize that and keep that to the side. But then as you parse that veneer of a sales exercise, which is what fundraising is this really an authentic person, right? Is this a person who, when stuff hits the fan, are they going to bolt and say, let me move on to my next venture with new capital, new investors, etc.? Or is this person who's just going to grind it out, stick it out till the time they are on the other side of the tunnel? And it's very hard to judge. We've been wrong many times, but thankfully we've been right more times than we've been wrong. So it's worked out. But authenticity is probably one thing that, and authenticity of everything, right? How they communicate, things they say, intellectual authenticity, like the consistencies. Do they say one thing at the beginning of the conversation and then say exactly the opposite thing at the end of the conversation, or between two conversations, do they contradict themselves? So just that authenticity as a human being and authenticity as intellectually, both are exceptionally critical.
Okay. I think a couple of questions around work culture, taking teams along as you grow. I think one of the critical areas that's coming out through the questions is that as you as an entrepreneur, as you sort of saw growth, how did you ensure that the culture sort of remain intact, and how did you have people align on that?
Look, when times are going well, you really have to do very little. But the unfortunate thing is, in no company, however, even the Google, Facebooks, and Microsofts of the world, even they have tough times, right? Relative to their past successes. So it's actually true leadership and true culture comes to bear only when times are tough. Until then, it's just, HR activities. But culture gets built by as I said earlier, just constant communication, and through authentic leadership, like just calling a spade a spade. If it's bad, like we have a philosophy internally that, look, if there is some bad news, the team should better hear it from us before they hear it from the press or someone outside the company, because that's how trust gets built and broken in one second. So just being authentic with your communication, transparent with your communication, obviously, but I do recognize as a practical matter, not everything can be shared with everyone all the time, real time, because there are confidential things in a company that can't be shared. But to the extent one can, one should be very open and transparent. I don't have any, I mean, obviously our HR, we have fantastic, I mean, everyone says they're fantastic culture, but I think the true determinant of that is tenure of employees. Like the average tenure, the median tenure of employees in any of our businesses is more than 5 years, right? So, which is an eternity in our ecosystem. And I think that is the only true test of whether you have a good culture or not, because what good is a culture if nobody sticks around? And I think that happens when people feel that they can trust you, they can trust this organization. If stuff is not going well, we'll tell them before they hear it from someone else. And if something goes really wrong, we will not leave them by the roadside, fending for themselves. So I think at the end of the day, if people do something as basic as this, you will have a great culture.
Sure. I think, what I'm seeing as a common theme is a lot of first principles at play over here. And I think it all sounds very logical, but of course it takes immense amount of discipline to be able to stick to these things as well, right? So just for everybody out there who's listening, right, it is far more difficult than what you sort of hear people say. I think we can squeeze in one last question considering the time, and then probably some closing remarks. How has your definition of success changed, or has it changed?
Yeah, that's an excellent question and probably an appropriate closing question. I've thought a lot about it, right? Like I think when people say success is actually, what they actually mean is happiness, right? Because success by itself is meaningless. Success in itself is also a means to an end, right? Success means you have money, success means you have fame, but that by itself is also a means to end. Eventually, what you are trying to do is, I'll have money, I'll have happiness. I'll have fame, I'll have happiness, right? I'll have muscles, I'll have happiness, right? Like whatever it is, right? Success by itself is just also a means. And I've given this a lot of thought through the years, and at least my distillation of this is that really in life only 3 things matter. And look, it'll be different for different people, but I can share what my thinking is, and it put me at immense ease and peace in my head, and given me a lot of courage to go through tough phases. I feel that only 3 things really matter in life if you want like happiness, peace, etc. One is on good health. And by the way, none of these 3 things are very hard, right? So when I tell you, so you need good health, and good health is what? Like exercise 4 times a week, right? And don't eat bread pakoras for breakfast every day, and you'll be fine. Like, yeah, if you get dealt a bad genetic lottery, then sure, too bad. But honestly, one can't say anything to that. But that doesn't happen to 95% of the people. So 95% of the people can just exercise 4 times a week and eat reasonably healthy, and you'll be fine through your life and lead a long, healthy life and spend a lot of time with your family. Second being family, where they actually don't want your money or fame or anything. They just want your time, little bit of undivided attention, and you want the same from them. At the end of the day, whatever one may do, family matters the most, more than friends, more than professional colleagues, etc. And the third is freedom, right? Which is, freedom is also of 2 types. One is don't do anything wrong, like don't steal, don't like do anything wrong, and you'll always have your physical freedom. But then there's also freedom of pursuit, freedom of doing what you really enjoy doing. And that's where the role of money comes in. Right? So actually, role of money doesn't come till this point, because Health doesn't need money. If you're grossly overweight, then you need money to hire an expensive trainer to make you lose weight. But otherwise, health doesn't need money. It just needs discipline. Family doesn't need money, right? Like not doing anything wrong doesn't need money. Only thing that needs some amount of money is having some amount of freedom of pursuing what you want to do in life, okay? What you truly enjoy and not out of compulsion. And actually, if you get to that point, and everyone has a different number in their minds, but if you get to that point, then you have freedom of pursuit also. I think the combination of these three, health, family, and freedom, to me is the true definition of success and happiness.
Well, very, very interesting. And I think with that and keeping an eye on the clock as well, we'll probably try and move to the close of this. So thank you. Thanks a lot, Kunal. I think with this, we can wrap our first leadership talk series with none other than such a trailblazing entrepreneur like Kunal Bahl. It has been very inspiring and motivating to hear you and about your journey, Kunal. We're extremely grateful that you have been able to carve out time of your schedule and to speak to the Aavishkaar Group and share your drive, vision about the future. And I'm sure in the process, a lot of us have gotten inspired and have been able to emulate or will be able to emulate on things that you have touched upon in the last 1 hour. On behalf of the entire Aavishkaar Group, once again, we extend our gratitude. I'd also like to thank everyone from the group members who have tuned in for today's session. And with this, have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Disha. Thanks.
Thank you.